Just tell me your name and what do you do?
Dexter Gilford. I'm an assistant district attorney with the Travis County DA's office. I'm the director of the Civil Rights Unit, which has two units, Civil Rights Division as well as a Conviction Integrity Unit.
And so what is that? What do you do on a day-to-day basis?
I'm an administrator. I'm also a director at our office. But the two units are independent from the rest of the office. The Civil Rights Unit handles only police officer involved shooting and use of force cases. And then the other unit is a Conviction Integrity Unit that is involved in attempting to identify individuals who our office may have prosecuted, who may in fact actually be innocent. So the two units are under my supervision and leadership. On a day-to-day basis, I work with the officer-involved shooting cases mostly.
So is that, that's not like internal affairs, right?
No, in a sense, yes, because it involves investigations of officers and the work they do while they're on duty, but our cases are limited to determining whether or not they committed criminal conduct that involved the use of force or injury to a person or their property. So in a sense, it is sort of like internal affairs. We work closely with the local police department's Special Investigations Unit to investigate officer use of force cases, shootings, and what we call less than lethal use of force cases. So in a sense, it is sort of like internal affairs. Yes, it's separate and independent from the rest of the office in that regard. That's what I mean.
So why do you do what you do? Why did you take this job, and and what does it do for you?
I thought that the job presented a challenge to me professionally, personally. I thought that some of the things that I wanted to try to do, we had an elected district attorney that was interested in doing some of the things that I was interested in. She had some ideas that she had come up with, and she had been informed by other community advocates and partners in the community. And the entire program sounded like something that would be good for this community, something that had not been done in Texas, and would allow us to effectively investigate and prosecute cases involving police officer use of force.
And how long has this department been in?
So there's always been a unit in the DA's office that handled police officer use of force cases. There's always been such a unit. However, when Ms. Moore took office in 2017, she took it, let me back up. Previously, it had been a unit within the office under the General Trial Division. That is, the same prosecutors that worked with police officers on a day-to-day basis also were involved in investigating cases when they came in, or you answered, your supervisor worked with them. So the first thing she did was take the unit out of the trial division, make it independent so that I report directly to her. The idea was to give us some independence. So this unit as a standalone independent unit has been in operation since 2017. It is staffed differently. We've added one attorney since I've been here and since Ms. Moore has been in office. We have a full-time investigator, and we've done a number of things that are quite different than the predecessor unit that handled these cases, the way that they did things. So it's a much markedly different prosecutorial experience.
So is Moore the DA, or
she's the current DA?
That is an elected position.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that the only attorney
elected
on the staff that's elected?
Yes, she's the only.
And then she basically
appoints appointed us, and she asked me to join her executive team when she prior to her taking office, and I joined in 2017, and I'm in my 4th year now.
And so why do you think this is important?
Well, I cannot think of a more significant interaction between an individual and the government. I was going to say citizen, but it doesn't matter, because whether citizen or not, it's the same principles that are applicable. there's not a more significant interaction that I can think of than that between an individual and the government when the government is authorized to use deadly force. There's no one there to sort of give prior approval for the use. By the time it's done, by the time the force is used, it's too late. So on both sides, the officer has to, in a split second, get it right, and the person on the other side is expecting the officer to get it right. And without a responsible and robust means of investigating those cases and prosecuting them in a way in which people can respect, I really do believe that you run the risk of the loss of public trust and confidence in your institutions. And if that happens, governance is made difficult. So it's probably not a more important undertaking that I could be engaged in as an attorney at this point in my life.
Wow. So, I mean, that's kind of like a flashpoint in the African-American community right now. So how does it feel, being kind of the guy who's responsible for, because you're looking at it from both sides, right?
Yes.
As an African-American man, as well as,
Yes.
you've got a job to do,
Yes.
and you've got to get it right as well.
Yes.
So how do you handle that piece?
Well, I'm old enough now and have enough professional experience now to know that if someone hires me, whether I'm in private practice or whether I'm in public office like I am now, that if someone hires me, they're hiring all of me. And that's what I bring to Ms. Moore in this community, and that's what I bring to all the cases that I handle. I'm saying that to say to you, the fact that I am black has obvious, undeniable import to the work I do, and I'm not ashamed of that. There are a number of things that we've done here since I've been here that have everything to do with the fact that I'm black. That is, I have well-meaning colleagues who are not here, and some of the things I've thought about, they simply just hadn't thought of them because we have different life experiences. So it has put me in a position where I've championed things that had not been championed before. The other side of it is that I have to recognize that I'm not going to be able to satisfy everybody. Every constituency expects what they expect from you. And there's no way that I could responsibly do this job if I attempted to meet every constituency's expectations. I tried at the end of the day, do what I would want done for me if it were my child or my loved one who had either been shot by a law enforcement officer for whom on whom less than lethal force had been used. If I satisfy myself that I've done the best in that regard, then I'm prepared to accept whatever criticism it is from whatever quarters they may come.
So I was sharing with you earlier that one of the lawyers had asked me to talk to you about your experience before you came to the DA's office. Can you talk about your prior experience?
Be glad to. I started out as a prosecutor in Bexar County, my hometown, San Antonio, and I prosecuted for 2 years. I prosecuted long enough to figure out that I was not a prosecutor at heart. I appreciated the role of the prosecutor, that is, that there was someone who needed to be prepared to prosecute criminal cases, but I also figured out that my sensibilities were not such that I was the best person to do it. I went into private practice, and to make a long story short, I found myself defending individuals who had been accused of capital murder. At the time in Texas, this was back in the 90s, the late 90s, mid to late 90s, when Texas led the nation pretty consistently in the number of not only death verdicts they got from Texas juries, but also the number of people that the state of Texas was executing every year. There were many years in which the state of Texas executed more people than any other state in the combined all the other states in the country, and in some cases more than entire countries. So it was a time in Texas where the death penalty was a real, palpable, actual event, an outcome. Travis County was no exception. Even putting aside for the moment the progressive sort of reputation that Travis County has, Travis County sought the death penalty. I found myself defending individuals who were accused of capital murder cases in which this office, the office in which I now serve, asked for the death penalty. Maybe 4 cases, 3 or 4 cases. And you have to remember each one of these cases is such a complex case that they usually take 2 to 3 years to resolve. So we're talking a significant part of my professional career was defending people who were accused of capital murder and faced a death sentence. And I was fortunate enough with my partners and we were fortunate enough to not have a single person get the death penalty in which the state sought it. Some of those cases went to trial. Most of them went to trial. Got not guilties in some. Most of them was life sentences from juries. In one, we were able to work out a plea agreement for a life sentence. So I'm thankful, fortunate that I never lost a single client to the death chamber at a time, even when in Travis County, juries were giving out death verdicts. So that's the kind of work I did. I was a criminal defense lawyer for all those years, about 20 years. I was board certified as a specialist. And in one of the cases, I defended a young man who was accused of killing a 2.5-year-old little girl. Turns out that I had always believed in his innocence. We went to trial. We got an acquittal, or not guilty in the case, and that year I won the State Bar of Texas's Defense Lawyer of the Year award. And thereafter, I became more involved in the sort of civic side of practicing law. I spoke at CLE events and so on and so forth, and served as president of my local defense bar, that kind of thing. So my background is in defending people in cases in which there was death penalty was an option on the table.
That's huge. That's wow. So that is really wild. So because you go from defending, the folks to being in the office. So, I know one of the lawyers had kind of talked to me about what he felt like, that you felt like you could do more here.
Well, the only reason I came to this office was because at that time, Ms. Moore had won the election, but she had not yet been sworn in as the district attorney. And when she told me what she wanted to do, I was interested in the work because it involved prosecuting law enforcement officers when it was appropriate. Other than that, I had no interest in being a prosecutor. This was in 2017. We had just had the experience starting in 2014 with Trayvon Martin, leading up to Michael Brown and Eric Garner and Walter Scott, all the high-profile cases involving young black men who were shot and unarmed and that kind of thing. So we were coming off of that, and I saw it as a challenge. And I thought that there were some opportunities that Ms. Moore, who wanted to approach this with a fresh set of eyes, increase transparency, increase the public trust and confidence in our office, and I thought this was an opportunity for me to do it.
Wow, that's amazing. I love it. All right, let me get back to the interview. Gosh, this is amazing. I love it. I love it. So when and where were you born? Oh, you don't tell me when, but you can tell me.
No, I'm not. I'm 54 years old,
All
San
right.
Antonio, Texas, born in 1965. I'm a Virgo.
You single?
Grew up-
I don't say no.
Yes.
The ladies be looking.
Well, there it is.
Believe me, they be looking.
Okay. I grew up and I'm still on the rolls of Second Baptist Church on the east side of San Antonio, which I'm proud. Went through public schools there, went to community college there, went to undergrad in Los Angeles, University of Southern California, and came back to UT to go to law school. And then as I mentioned earlier, I went back to San Antonio to prosecute, and then came back up here where I did defense work. By the way, in 2011, I stopped practicing law for 5 years. So I just came back to practicing law in 2017. Yeah, I was teaching. I went back to school and I was teaching.
Oh, wow.
My mother at that time was very ill, and I took care of her until she passed away. But in the meantime, I went back to school, got 2 master's degrees in completely unrelated fields.
Wow. Where'd you get it
I got a master's in English and an MFA in creative writing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
So you want to write?
Yeah, I still want to write. I just don't know how I'll be able to do it.
You can do
I
it.
still want to write.
You can do it.
Yeah,
You can do it.
I just, I have to take care of my children and such, but no, I still want to write.
It's awesome.
So teaching is something that I want to get back into
Yeah.
eventually, but this presented an opportunity for me to do some things that I thought could have an impact.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So tell me about growing up in San Antonio. What was life like?
So I grew up in the 70s. I was out of high school by 82, 83, but I grew up in the 70s. And San Antonio at the time was and it's not as much as it was, but a very, very insular and divided city. Most black people lived on the east side of east side. Hispanics dominated south and west, and you had mostly Caucasian live on the north side. So I say that to say to you that I was always in the sorts of things you see in other cities with larger black populations, that is more readily identifiable, distinct distinctions between your various socioeconomic levels are not as marked in San Antonio. So you might be lower middle class for black folk, and 2 blocks over, conditions of poverty prevail. So I grew up like that, and it was a rich experience growing up. When I went off to school and met young men from all over the country, from urban areas like Harlem, Detroit, St. Louis, Chicago, so on, I found out that my experience growing up was not much unlike theirs. I'm talking about people who actually grew up in tough neighborhoods, and that did a lot for my worldview and my perspective. But I grew up both my mother and father were in the home. They were both professionals. They both were first generation college graduates. My father's from East Texas. My mother's from Arkansas, but grew up in Los Angeles. That's how I ended up going to school out there, because my family's out there. I have one sister. Went to public schools. Went to back then what was called junior college. It's now called community college. Right there on the east side. My mother was a teacher. My dad sold insurance. So I had a good childhood. I lost a number of my friends to violence in prison. I'm sure like many young men my age that grew up in urban areas. And that part of me has continued to inform my sensibilities to this day. It's informed my sensibilities to this day. But I had a good childhood, good parents. I thank God every day for my parents. They were great people.
When did you decide to be a lawyer?
7-8 months before I graduated from undergrad, because I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't grow up wanting to be a lawyer. I'm not one of those kids, I always wanted to be a lawyer. Nah, I never even thought about being a lawyer. I was out in California, out in Los Angeles, and about 7-8 months before the end of the school year, sitting around at a table talking, everybody had plans except me. And they were going around the table, what you gonna do, what you gonna do? And they got to me, my cousin was sitting there, and she said she wanted to go to law school. So when they got around to me, I was like, yeah, I want to go to law school. So she was like, I didn't know you wanted to go. I said, yeah. Well, so one thing led to another. Then I had to follow the script. I had to go take the LSAT, and I had to go do all that stuff. So I never wanted to be a lawyer, which is why I ended up 20-something years later going back to school for English and creative writing. But you know, my mother and father, they were great people, but they never talked to me about, they talked to me about how to prepare myself to take care of myself.
Right.
They didn't talk to me about, you know, they weren't so much talking to me about, you like to write? You ever thought about writing? You know? God bless them, rest in peace.
Yeah.
But they were trying to prepare me to be able to take care of myself. And I understand with their life experiences and where they were from, why they focused on that.
Right.
But no, I never thought about being a lawyer. I fell into practicing law. I was good at it, so I never got out of it. I never got out of it until the 5 years when I went back home to take care of my mother. And I did that only because my mother was sick, and at that time in my life, it was important to me that if she had Alzheimer's, and it was important to me that if it was possible that she died, she passed away in her own home. The only way that was going to happen is if I was there. So that's how I ended up going back. But no, I didn't plan on being a lawyer. I wish it was that neatly planned out, but it wasn't.
All right. What about college? What did you? What were your thoughts about college? Did you know you were going to go?
You know, I didn't give college much thought when I was my mother and father talked about it all the time because they both went to college. My mother went, she had a master's degree from UT. My father went to college. So both of them were big on it, but I listened to them, but I had my own ideas about what it was I was going to do, and not all of it, not all of the things that I was thinking about I'm proud of at this point. I'm glad I didn't do some of those things, but so I got a job when I got out of high school, full-time job, and I went to school part-time to satiate my parents. Well, I got basically was community college now, and I ended up on the dean's list and all that kind of thing. I was good at it. So when I finished community college, my mother asked me, you know, so what's next? And I knew I had kinfolk out in California. I'm like, LA, I could do that. So I ended up in Los Angeles going to school. And I majored in business administration with an emphasis in finance. And after that, law school. So to be honest with you, you know, now that I talk about it, all of this kind of just I didn't plan any of this. You know, it just kind of happened. Okay, what's next? Okay, I'll go do that. Almost like I had 100 years to burn. So I just kind of ended up here, to be quite honest with you. And I'm only now at 54 trying to figure out how to redirect this thing into something that I want to be doing, right? So, yeah.
Describe a moment that changed the way you think about life.
Well, there have been several of them. I'll try to find one, think of one that from the practice of law. I defended a man once. It was the first death penalty case that I tried. And I defended a man who was he had been associated with white supremacists. I'm not sure that he really was committed to that, but you know, he was young, and but we became very close during the course of my representation of him. And it was a death penalty case. The state was seeking to execute him. And I was defending him he had been accused of raping and murdering a prostitute. And I remember we got the verdict. He got convicted, but at the sentencing phase, the jury basically spared his life, which is what we were hoping to accomplish. And we talked to the jury afterwards, and one of the jurors alluded to the fact that the victim in the case, that nobody was there, like none of her family showed up for the trial. They've been estranged for years. She'd been a prostitute with drug addiction and so on. And the juror didn't come out and say it, but it was clear to me that had the victim been valued more, seen as having some tangible value more to her community, that they might have voted to execute my client. It was almost like he got the benefit of having had a victim in his case that was deemed as having not had any substantial contributions to society. So on the one hand, I was glad that he did not get the death penalty, that the machinery of death had not continued to plow its way on through his life. But it was mixed sentiment that I felt in seeing face to face how devaluation, how we devalue one another, and how it can have those sorts of actual impacts in people's lives.
What advice would you give young people who are thinking about being Dexter Gilford one day?
Or not to be Dexter Gilford. I didn't go into practice. I didn't go into practicing law with anybody in mind that I wanted to model myself after. After I got into the law, I chose people that I wanted to pattern myself after. So I think what I would tell them is, first, I'd ask them why they want to practice law. And if they're talking to me about anything that has to do with prestige, power, monetary remuneration, I might not be the person for them to talk to. But if they talk to me about things like making an impact in their communities, making an impact on the law, that sort of thing, making those kinds of contributions, then I could engage them, and I would tell them, first of all, decide early on what the conditions of your life are. That is, what conditions are not negotiable for you. Decide that now. Like, no matter what it is, the only way I'm going to do this is if these 2-3 things abound. That you have to have your bottom line starting out. And then secondly, find somebody that you respect and carry their bags for them and ask them, can you follow them around and watch what they do? And you sort of imitate that until you learn how to be yourself. It's the same way jazz musicians learn to play jazz. They imitate the people that influence them until they can get their own voice, right? And that'd be the advice I'd give.
What do you feel is your place or your purpose in life?
Say something to whoever comes across my path. Someone who's looking for something. If someone comes across my path who is looking for something, that I have something to say to them. That's the first thing, that I have something to say. Secondly, clarification. Oh. I'd like to, my purpose is to try to clarify some of the complexities that I think we all face that hinder us from really developing into who we are meant to be. Being able to clarify some of those things, because it's a complex process, and I see my role as trying to find a way to clarify some of these things that ultimately will help us all be able to affirm ourselves, right?
Who do you admire?
John Coltrane. John Coltrane.
You're a musician, man.
No, absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
People, there's much to be learned from his life and his example. He spent a long part of his early to mid part of his career as a kind, loving, dedicated musician who struggled like a lot of musicians at his time, with substance abuse. And through dedication, he married a wonderful woman, which you can't talk about John Coltrane without talking about Alice Coltrane. But every man should be married to an Alice Coltrane. But his dedication to his craft, the purposes to which he committed his life, the work he left, John Coltrane.
Describe the Black experience here in Austin.
Oh, that's going to be hard for you because, you know, I think it's not unlike Black experience. I don't know. I could approach that as being a Black student. I could approach that as being a Black professional. I could approach that as being a Black man. My experiences here as a Black man, I don't think are unlike the experiences of any Black man anywhere. I've experienced the same sorts of things that I think we face everywhere we go. I think it's much more concentrated in other areas where there's many more of us there. But my experience here has been one of having often felt when I was younger, estranged, sort of not even tolerated, because it wasn't even like it was enough of us to be tolerated, but sort of an afterthought, I felt like. So I don't know, my experience here has been, I don't think it's been very different than Black men in any place. We just don't have the same sorts of cultural, social outlets that you find in other cities where there are more of us. The other thing is, to some extent, Austin is an artificial place to some extent, because you really don't, you have people from other places here, and sometimes in greater numbers than in folks who grew up here. So really what you're getting is a sort of a semblance of what Black Austin is. You experiencing a sort of,
Yeah.
it's like being in, like you're still in college, or something, So I guess that's the best way I can describe that.
That's good. What's your hope for Austin?
That it makes us transition from being a mid-sized provincial college/government city that adopted and marketed this notion of being this progressive haven, that it can make the transition to maturity. And maturity being in it's a large city, it has problems that other large cities has, and that it won't be able to inoculate itself from the kinds of problems other cities have. It's in the process now of dealing with some of those things, but I'm not sure they're navigating them as well as I'd like them to. But my hope is that it matures into the big city that it is, and that we, by the way, actually not coincidentally, I hope that we can get past some of the rhetoric and really deal with the issues, apart from this notion that Austin, like, progressive this, progressive that, liberal this, liberal that, and really deal with these issues outside of that context of those kinds of labels, Yeah.
How do you want people, or how do you think people will remember you?
Oh, as thoughtful, as a thoughtful person, as a caring person, as a kind, sensitive, and perhaps overextensive of myself. I believe that, because like I said, I'm 54 years old, and I know enough people. I have enough people around me to tell me the truth, that I have a sense of how people perceive me. So as a kind, caring, sensitive, dedicated person.
Have you ever experienced racism, like overt racism that you know without a shadow of a doubt that it was racism?
Me, yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely, all the time.
Why do you say
Well, I ain't
it
gonna say
like
all the time, but
Why do you say it like that?
okay, but because I've had to, I've had to mix it up with folk behind it. That's why. I've had to mix it up with people behind it. Like, I mean, mix it up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, I've had to, when I was a younger man, I had to knock somebody out twice. So, yeah, no, I'm, not as much recently, but no, I mean, that was an ever sort of present, getting called nigga and that kind of thing. And no, I've had quite a few experiences with that. I think more recently, I think what I've encountered is this sort of sense that what I believe to be is a sort of devaluation of black life, of black life, a devaluation of black life, encoded, sort of coded language, and the way the juries handle the cases that we present to them, and the sort of compromises they make, and the reasoning processes they engage in to get to where they're going in terms of making a legal decision about whether somebody's guilty or not. I think that one of the precepts and assumptions is that this sort of devaluation of black life, especially black life that's seen as what do you call it? Dysfunctional. Especially dysfunctional black life. I sense that even in the work I do right now.
Is that more like deviant behavior? More?
No, I mean, I'm saying,
not the norm.
Okay. For example, if I have a young man who is a drug addict, right? People may be more inclined to excuse somebody violating this person as long as they didn't kill him, right? I get that sense. Yeah, it's just my anecdote. It's anecdotal,
right?
But I get that sense. It's almost as if, in the law, juries make decisions, and they have to reconcile competing interests. And nobody's ever going to come out and say it. But if you ask yourself the question, if you let's say you charge an officer with a simple assault on a black person, when they go back and talk about, well, how is this going to impact this officer's career? You see? Which I don't dismiss as completely illegitimate. The problem is that the contrafact is not given the sort of same weight, right? That is, how is this incident, if it does not get dealt with, how does this impact this young man's trust and confidence in our institutions? You see? That kind of thing is the way I see that playing out now. But when I was a kid, I had to knock a couple of guys out for it. So no, I've experienced that. And by the way, I know when I'm looking at it when it's not overt. I know when I'm looking, nobody can tell me different. I know what it is. I got 54 years, and I know what I'm seeing, and I know what I'm feeling, and nobody can tell me different.
Why do you think it's important to talk about racism?
I mean, there's one view on one. I mean, I can give you the answer that I tell my kids or group of students if I was teaching them, and that is that the notion of discourse and dialogue between people is the only way that you're going to get to a clarification of issues, right? Everybody needs to figure out exactly what it is they're feeling and saying, and you can only do that within the context of give and take in the dialogue. It's the only way you're going to be able to do it. When your views are being challenged and you're having to defend them or abandon them or modify them, the only way you can do that is in the context of dialogue. Having said that, I'm not sure there's any much more we need to talk about. I mean, we've been up in here for a long time, right? We've been up in here for a long time.
But there's no racism.
Well,
we had a black president.
That dealt with it, right? Yeah. No, I think that at this point, I'm not sure what more there is to talk about, because anybody that takes the position that is not a constituent part of this country's social, every facet of this country, history, social, economic, political, so on, I think it's being disingenuous, and they're playing games with you. They're playing games with you. And what more is it that we got? I don't know what more it is we got to say to anybody. You know, I don't know what more we got to say. Everybody knows what this is. Everybody knows. Yeah.
What life lessons have you learned?
Be honest. Figure out what it is that you figure out what it is you're supposed to be doing and do it. When you find a good friend, whatever it is, friend, partner, lover, whatever, they're good for you. If you can, keep them close to you. And don't let the nonsense, like you have to find your, I think the most important thing is you have to find your totem. So-called primitive societies organize into clans, and these clans dictate a number of things within the society: who you can marry, all of that, function, all that. But you flourish best when you're with your clan, when you're with your totem, and your totem and your clan is not always your mother and your father and the people you grew up with. It's good if the people you grew up with and who raised you are your totem, but we know that often they're not. You got to get out in this world, find those people, and when you find them, hold on to them. That's what I would say. Most important.
Last question. What do you enjoy doing in your leisure time?
I read, I write, I collect albums, not CDs. I collect albums, records, and I've been collecting them before it got popular again.
You still have them?
Oh, I probably got this whole wall, 2 walls of these full all the way to the ceiling. I collect. I mean, I really collect. I'm a serious listener and jazz, listener, and I play a little bit of jazz piano, just a little bit, but mainly listen to music, write, and read. That's what I enjoy doing.
So that's all I have. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
No, I thank you for this opportunity. I hope, I wish you success in your endeavor, and I hope that I'm able to make some connections and meet some people here whom I don't know right now. Thank you. Thank you for the honor.